battle. It was a woman, a young nun in a black habit, stretched out under the burning Kansas sun. Jake jumped off his horse so fast the dust rose like smoke. He dropped to one knee beside her. Her feet were bare. They were cut and dusty, every toe streaked with dried blood. Her habit smelled of sweat and sun-baked cloth, the sharp mix of fear and heat that told Jake she had been running for a long time under that cruel sky. Jake touched her wrist to check for a pulse. The skin was hot, burning hot, like she had walked miles through the heat with no rest at all. Her lips moved just a little, a whisper so faint he thought it was the wind. "That is forbidden." He leaned in. She whispered it again. This time her voice trembled like she was afraid even of the words leaving her mouth. Jake had seen a lot in his 52 years, from droughts to gunfights and hard winters, but he had never seen a nun collapsed and alone in the prairie with fear written all over her face. Her eyes opened halfway, blue and unfocused. They were scared and lost, but underneath the fear was an old hurt that had been carried for a long time. Jake lifted her head gently and felt the heat coming off her skin. Heat like fever. When he touched her shoulder to look for injuries, she whispered it again. "That is forbidden," not like a warning, more like a plea. And Jake understood. She was not scared of him. She was scared of rules, of judgment, of whatever punishment a young nun might face for letting a rancher lay a hand on her, even if he was trying to save her life. Jake pulled out his bandana, dipped it into his water skin, and placed it on her forehead. She flinched at first, then relaxed, almost melting into the touch of something cool for the first time in who knows how long. Far off in the distance, he heard hooves. If someone from town found her like this, lying in his arms, it would not end well for her. Or maybe even for him. Jake slid one arm under her knees and one behind her back. He lifted her carefully, and she leaned against his chest like she had no strength left to fight anything. He could feel how light she was in his arms, and he knew there was a story behind it. Whatever had driven a nun into the middle of the Kansas prairie, and it was not something small, but as he carried her toward his horse, one question kept nagging him. What could be so forbidden that it drove a young nun into the middle of the Kansas prairie? Jake rode slow, keeping one arm steady around the young nun so she would not slide off his horse. She stayed quiet the whole ride, breathing shallow, her head resting lightly against his chest. By the time they reached the small creek near the Hollister Ranch, Jake realized something strange. She had not fought him, not even when she woke halfway and saw she was being carried by a man she had never met. Her fingers had tightened on his shirt like she was holding on to the last safe thing in the world. He stepped off the horse and carried her inside his cabin. It was a simple place, wood walls, a pot on the stove, and a Bible on the table he had not read as often as he promised himself. He laid her gently on his bed. Jake soaked the cloth and placed it on her forehead. She stirred, eyes fluttering open just enough to see where she was. Relief, a slow kind of relief that said she had not felt safe in a long time. He gave her water. She took a small sip, then another. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Where am I?" Jake pulled up a chair beside her. "Hollister Ranch, couple miles west of Dodge City. You passed out cold in the grass." She nodded, like she expected that answer and knew she had pushed herself past her limits. "My name's Jake," he said. "What is yours?" It was like even her own name was something she had to guard. Then she whispered, "Sister Elise." Jake nodded slowly. "Elise, then." She looked around the little cabin, her fingers curling into the blanket. He saw clearly this woman was running from something heavier than the heat that had knocked her down. She tried to sit up. Jake gently held her shoulder. "Take it easy. No one is coming for you here." Fear flickered there, quick and sharp. Not fear of him. Fear of being found. She swallowed hard. "Jake, if they ask about me, you must say you never saw me." Jake leaned back, eyebrows raised. Who exactly is coming after a nun in the middle of a Kansas summer?" Elise looked toward the door like someone might walk in any second. Then she whispered the words that made Jake's whole body tense. "Jake, I did not run from God. I ran from the people inside the church. What in the world could a nun have seen that was so dangerous she had to flee for her life?" Jake sat back in his chair, studying the young woman in his bed like she had just told him the world was flat. Running from God was one thing. Running from the church itself was a whole different storm. Elise pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at her hands. They were shaking. Jake kept his voice steady and calm, the same voice he used with skittish horses. You can tell me no one else is here. She took a shaky breath, back at the mission in Dodge City. Things were not holy anymore. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew that mission was supposed to be a place folks trusted. Elise looked up with eyes that held more truth than she wanted to carry. There is a man there, a man everyone respects. But he is not who they think he is. He let her speak at her own pace. She swallowed hard. He's using the mission for money, for things no one should ever hide behind a cross. Jake felt the heat rise in his chest, the quiet kind of anger older men know well, the slow burn that comes from seeing someone use faith as a shield for their own dirt. I found letters, books with numbers that make no sense. I told one of the older sisters, and the next morning she was gone. Jake leaned forward. Gone where? Elise shook her head. They told me she left on her own, but I saw the sheriff speaking to Father Whitlock that same night. And after that, he started watching me, following me, and asking where I slept, where I prayed. Jake rubbed a hand across his jaw. Sheriff Collins, a man Jake never trusted, a man who smelled like trouble even when he tried to look holy. I knew if I stayed, I would disappear too. So I slipped onto a freight wagon heading out of town and rode it as far as the river. Then I walked until my legs gave out. And that is how you found me. Her voice cracked on that last sentence, and for the first time since he found her, Elise began to cry, those quiet, tired tears that come when a person has held everything in for too long. Jake stayed in his chair, hands clasped, letting her cry without looking away. You know, I once kept my mouth shut when I should have spoken. My wife needed a doctor, and the man in town turned us away because we could not pay enough. I walked out of that office without saying a word. She died 2 days later. I have had to live with that silence every day since. So believe me when I tell you this. If you are brave enough to speak, I am not going to let you stand there alone. Jake stood up and went to the window, staring out at the quiet land. He had spent years minding his own business, but hearing what this girl had gone through brought back something he thought he had buried with his wife, a need to protect and to make things right. Elise, if what you're saying is true, then this is bigger than both of us. I know, but I cannot go back alone. Jake stepped closer, eyes steady. You will not while I'm breathing. Now the real fight was coming, the kind that shakes a whole town. If you are still with me, friend, I hope you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next. Grab a cup of tea or coffee, settle in, and tell me in the comments what time it is for you right now and where you're listening from. 2 mornings later, Jake woke before sunrise. It was one of those quiet Kansas mornings when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He stepped outside, boots sinking lightly into the cool dirt, and scanned the horizon. Inside the cabin, Elise was awake too. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of warm water. Jake sat across from her. All right, he said. We need answers. She nodded. If Father Whitlock knows I escaped, he will send others. He will not give up. We are going into town. Her eyes widened. Into Dodge City. Jake nodded. If the man is dirty, folks need to see the truth with their own eyes. Elise took a shaky breath. What if they see me? Jake smiled a little, the kind of smile only a stubborn older rancher can manage. Then let them look. You have nothing to be ashamed of. They rode out together. Jake handed her an old trail hat from the peg by the door before they left. It was sun-faded and a little too big, but when she pulled the brim low over her brow, it hid half her face and gave her just enough courage to keep going. The prairie stretched wide and golden, heat rising already even though the morning was still young, and by the time the roofs of Dodge City appeared, Elise was gripping the saddle tighter than she meant to, cowboys tying up horses, and right in the center, the mission house stood tall and quiet, like it had never known a day of sin. Jake dismounted first. Elise followed, her hands trembling. He placed a gentle hand near her elbow. "I am right here." When they reached the edge of town, Elise almost stopped walking. Her legs felt like they did back in that field, weak and shaking, only this time it was not the sun that was beating her down. "I do not know if I can do this," she whispered. Jake offered his hand, rough and steady. "You do not have to shout," he said. "You just have to say the truth once, and I will stand right beside you while you do it." For the first time in a long time, she was scared and not alone. As they walked toward the church doors, people began to stare in recognition. A nun gone missing never stays a secret for long. Near the entrance stood Sheriff Collins. He stepped forward with that slow, oily smile he wore when he thought he had the upper hand. "Morning, Jake. You bringing her back where she belongs?" Jake did not blink. "That depends. You plan to tell the truth today?" The sheriff's smile faded just enough to show the man underneath. Then the doors of the mission opened, and Father Whitlock himself stepped out. Face calm, eyes cold as a January pond. His gaze landed on Elise. "There you are, child. Come along now. We will settle all this inside." Elise stepped back. Jake stepped forward. And right there, in the middle of Dodge City, the air cracked with tension, so sharp it felt like lightning waiting to strike. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster. Whitlock's eyes narrowed, and Jake realized something. They were not here to talk. Now the only question was this: who would make the first move? Sheriff Collins had one hand hovering at his hip, and right in the middle of it all, Elise stepped forward. Elise opened her mouth, but at first no sound came out. Her knees buckled just a little. Jake's hand tightened on her elbow, holding her up more than she was holding herself. "I'm not going inside with you. Not today. Not ever again." The crowd around them went still, but not everyone leaned the same way. Another man near the back muttered, "The father would never do such a thing." Whitlock lifted his chin. "Children say wild things when they are frightened," he said smoothly. "Come now, sister. Let us talk in private." He took a step toward her. Elise froze. Jake moved in front of her before the priest could get any closer. "If you want her, you go through me." Collins let out a short laugh, but his hand dropped lower toward his gun. Some people backed away while others held their ground, eyes jumping between the sheriff and the rancher like they were watching a fuse burn. Jake kept his eyes locked on the sheriff, calm and steady, but inside he knew one bad move could turn this square into a graveyard. Then Elise spoke again, louder this time. "I saw the books. I saw the lies. And I saw what happened to the ones who tried to speak before me," one man shouted. "You watch your tongue, girl. That priest buried my mama. He would never harm anyone. But next to him..." The storekeeper stepped forward, jaw tight. "Father Whitlock owes me 3 months of unpaid bills," he said. "And every time I ask, he tells me God will provide. Maybe this is God providing." A mother near the front pulled her daughter closer. "My oldest went to work at the mission kitchen," she whispered. "One day she just stopped coming home. No letter. No goodbye. You told me she ran off. But Father, were you lying to me too? Were you..." Jake looked around at the faces, some angry, some confused, some just tired of feeling small. "You all trusted this place," he said. "But trust only works if a man earns it." Collins swore under his breath and yanked his gun free. "Enough of this." He lifted the barrel toward Jake. A few people screamed and ducked. As he fired, 2 ranch hands slammed into his arm, and the shot went wild, smacking harmlessly into the brick above the mission door. In the chaos, Whitlock spun and tried to run back inside. He made it 3 steps before the storekeeper and another man tackled him in the doorway. The struggle shoved the mission door wide open. Papers spilled from a half-open cabinet. A metal box clanged to the floor and burst apart, pouring ledgers and rolled bills across the entry like spilled guts. An old woman bent down and picked up a page, her hand shaking as she read. "Money for orphan children," she said. "Sent to Sally's saloon in Dodge City." Folks rushed to the threshold and stared down at the mess. Page after page of numbers. names, and payments that never reached the people they were meant for. No one who saw it all laid out needed a judge to explain what they were seeing, though a few still looked like they wished they did not believe it. Whitlock tried to speak, but no one listened. The sheriff tried to shove his way free, but 3 townsmen grabbed his arms before he could hurt anyone else. Jake did not have to throw a punch. The truth itself did the fighting. By sunset, Collins was in irons in his own jailhouse, watched by men who used to fear him. Whitlock was taken away for questioning by men who were not afraid of him anymore. And Elise stood in the doorway of the mission, not as a runaway nun, but as the woman who finally brought light into a place that had been dark for far too long. Instead, Elise stayed and worked beside the other sisters, cleaning house in more ways than one. Records were sorted, and hungry mouths were finally fed with the money that had been kept from them for so long. Every Saturday evening, when the work was done and the light turned soft over the prairie, Jake would ride in and wait by the fence. She still wore her habit and had not yet decided what to do with her vows. But both of them knew something had started that day in the grass, when a worn-out rancher picked up a worn-out nun and refused to let her disappear. Sometimes the bravest kind of love does not shout from the rooftops. It just rides in every Saturday evening, ties its horse to the same fence post, and waits quietly in the golden light until the day she's finally ready to walk out and meet it. And if you want more quiet but powerful Western tales like this, you can subscribe and ride along with me next time.